Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story today is about Kashmir Martyrs Day. Memories are short, very short. Most people think that Kashmiri struggle began on 14th August 1947, that everything was good until that fateful midnight. Nothing can be further from truth. 89 years ago on this day, 13th July 1931, 22 Muslim men were killed and over 40 injured when police opened fire on them in the compound of Srinagar jail. This was Kashmir's Jallianwala Bagh. But the sentiment against the oppressive Dogra Raja was rising. There were 4 earlier incidents of discrimination against Muslims on the basis of their religion. The lid went up with the trial of Abdul Qadir. Kashmiri politician, scholar and writer Premnath Bazaz, in his book Inside Kashmir, wrote, and I quote, "The driving force behind the mass agitation till 13 July was the discontent among the rank and file of the Muslims. The attack on the jail was in no way directed against the Hindus, and those who laid down their lives at the jail gate did so fighting against an unsympathetic government. It was a fight of the tyrannized against their tyrants, of the oppressed against the oppressors," unquote. But let's get to the reasons of that fight against the oppressors and the significance of the day for Kashmiris on both sides of the artificial line that separates them. We are joined by Ambassador Arif Kamal, a former diplomat with assignments in Moscow, Tokyo, and whose family had to leave Jammu during the Jammu massacre, and Mirza Saaeb Beg, an eminent Kashmiri lawyer who's currently studying a master's program in public policy at the Blavatnik School of Government, the University of Oxford. Thank you to both panelists. Let me begin with Ambassador Kamal. Ambassador Kamal, as I said, memories are very short. And everyone thinks that, pre-1947, everything was hunky-dory. It wasn't. There were so many incidents of discrimination and oppression. Give us a sense of what the environment pre-47 was and why 13 July 1931 is so significant.
Well, sir, I think 13th of July ought to be viewed as the beginning of the first Kashmiri awakening. And it is synonymous with what we may call civil rights, struggle for the civil rights. And of course, this step had actually paved way for the second awakening demanding accountable government. And the third came as the latest stage as the struggle for liberation. Now, I think this is, you have rightly said, this marked the beginning in many ways of Kashmiris. Of course, the catalyst for this was as apparently an outsider who spoke very eloquently and sparked off the protest. But as you said, Premnath Bazaz has articulated how the discontent was already shaping and discrimination was so pronounced that it had to be really a spontaneity in terms of the reaction that came on the street and the spontaneity that came in defense of that butler who was taken into custody or put on trial, the spontaneity of people's support for him. So this people for the first time realized, and people in the valley and in the periphery realized that they have a personality of their own. They have to speak out, and once they start speaking out, it will be heard. And I think from that standpoint, there are other smaller events that took place about the same time, say the industrial unrest in Resham Khana, the places that were not allowed to even organize a political party or a political forum, and they turned this into a reading room in a club in Srinagar and one in Jammu. And that is how the infrastructure started developing between the valley and Jammu, how they could join hands and offer a resistance to the autocratic rule and demand the end to discriminations that were taking place. In no case, I think it should be seen as a kufr or Islam ki jang ya Hindu Muslim as we are used to reading in some of the textbooks.
That's what Pandit Premnath Bazaz also wrote. As a matter of fact, the book Inside Kashmir is essentially about the events of 1931. But let me hop over to Mirza Saaeb Beg. Mr. Beg, what do you think is the significance of this moment? As Ambassador Kamal said, this was the first awakening. So was this the first intifada? There was this collective sense of self-consciousness among the Kashmiris?
See, first of all, any revolutionary martyr will possess a certain potential to arouse and mobilize a submissive and incipient community to support a revolutionary movement and to adopt the cause of the revolution. And this is the significance of Martyrs' Day for us as Kashmiris. It is the day that gave lifeblood to a movement of political awakening. Because until that point of time, the Kashmiri Muslims had endured systemic humiliation, economic injustice. This is something that all our ancestors have endured. They have risen up against it so that we can prosper. Now, today, if I'm speaking to you in a foreign language, it is because I now have access to education and opportunities which were otherwise denied to my ancestors. So the martyr is not self-made. The martyr does not exist in a vacuum. He or she is a product of the society, and his creation is conditionally dependent on the nature of the social environment and all these other catalysts. So this is the significance of Martyrs' Day to us, that it was the day when people in Kashmir rose up and gave their lifeblood towards this movement of political awakening, and it created the momentum towards a political process. Because until that point of time, you see, if you contextualize Martyrs' Day, you have to understand the conditions in which the Kashmiri Muslim was living at that time. If you read the Glancy Commission report, or if you read the reports that have come out even by the British government about the condition of the Muslims at that time, the Muslims were in a position which present-day Hindutva fanatics they cannot even dream of. They dream of creating such a situation, the one in which Muslims of Kashmir have already been living in the 1930s. Of all the state employments, all the state benefits, everything was geared towards a Hindu identity. So the Dogras had essentially created a Hindu state. And by Hindu state, I don't just mean the religion of the rulers. I mean that every aspect of governance, every aspect of state benefit, everything was geared around reform. Everything was geared around the Hindu identity. So that is something that present-day Hindutva fanatics can only dream of creating. The level that had been achieved under the Maharaja, under the Dogras. So to rise up against that, it took revolutionary courage. And these men who gave their lives that day, they gave the lifeblood for the movement. So it is a reminder for us that our ancestors have given their lives so that we can prosper. And today, what is happening in Kashmir, in many ways, it has been seen as a recreation of the Dogra rule, when our citizenship has been taken away, when we will not be given equal rights of privilege, equal status before the law. So in many ways, it is a recreation of the Dogra era. And today, Martyrs' Day assumes a renewed importance for us.
Absolutely, eloquently put. Ambassador Kamal, one of the things that happened, and this happened in Jammu, when a Hindu landlord converted to Islam. And the state, the Dogra Raja state, decided to deprive him of his property, and the case actually went to court. And the court also threw out, and his property was given to his siblings. Give us a sense of what the atmosphere in Jammu was in the lead up to the Jammu massacre, about which your family was also one of the sufferers.
Well, the transformations that took place were also very encouraging. I think we also need to look at the positive side, that with the struggle set in motion in 1931, there were the Pandits, there were also Sikh and Dogras who joined the bandwagon of the struggle, or the vanguard for the attainment of civil rights. And I think when we see talk of the depriving a gentleman of his property because he opted to change the religion, I think we also need to recall that there was Sardar Butt Singh, there was Ved Bhasin Ji, there was Krishan Dev Sethi, there are many more. Of course, 30s to 40s, their transformations did take place. And I think to be fair to the Dogras to an extent, as far as possible, I think they were also getting used to reorienting themselves to a changing environment around them. And I think from Ranbir Singh down to Hari Singh, there was also a change, the societal change that impacted on the rulers' personalities and behavior patterns as well. I'm not privy to that because I was born only in 1947. But I think that there was not a static position that we can really relate to the Dogra rule. And also, I would not buy the argument that it remained a Hindu-dominated polity. The Hindu Hindutva, if you may call, of that times, had undergone a transformation and a change. And therefore, I think that was, again, a reason, right or wrong, I am not trying to defend that, that Muslim Conference was transformed into National Conference for a while. And then obviously, and when it was transformed, it was not only Sheikh Abdullah, it was Ghulam Abbas, again with him, to rename the party, because the transformation within the society and the responses and the varying responses that were coming from the ruling elite, also from their perception, from the perception of the political leaders, that also demanded some sort of adjustments in the political vocabulary and political agenda of action. That's
Absolutely.
how I look at it.
Absolutely. Mirza Beg, you want to add something to this, what Ambassador Kamal said? Any further nuances? Because this is just fascinating.
Just to touch upon what you had mentioned about the Hindu man who had been deprived of his property, this was in actually law at that time, that because in order to check the spread of Islam, a law had been promulgated by the government that if a Hindu converted to Islam, he or she would be debarred from the right of inheritance. But if a Muslim converted to Hindu, they would continue to have their right of inheritance.
Was this
a very small minority...
Was this the Ranbir Act?
Well, this was a law passed by the Dogra rule. There were various promulgations that have been made, and it was all set up to be geared around the Hindu identity, around a Hindu imagination. For example, for a very small minority, the majority of the population of the state was not allowed to slaughter a cow or ox. Killing cows was banned, and those people who were found guilty were severely punished. Initially, the punishment was death sentence. Later, it was reduced to life imprisonment, and later to 7 years imprisonment. In fact, in the 1920s, there was a study done that out of the 117 prisoners in Kashmir, 99 were Muslim, and they were all being punished for killing a cow. So what I mean to say is that in every respect, law, imagination, reform, everything was geared towards propagating the Hindu identity. And this incentive, which you refer to as well, of the law that has been made where a Hindu is given property, a Muslim is not given property, this is also a part of that imagination where you incentivize conversion towards one religion and you disincentivize or actually penalize if someone converts to Islam.
And do you see these rather uncannily diabolical sort of similarities between what kind of imagination was trying the Dogras were trying to instill at that time and what's happening now with the Hindutva onslaught?
Yes, you are absolutely right about that. You see, in the last few years, Muslim names in India have been changed. Allahabad's name has been changed to Prayagraj. Similarly, even under the Dogras, Ranbir Singh, he had closed down the Friday market in Jammu Masjid and he opened a new market called Maharajaganj. Even Muslim names were not tolerated. Muslim names were converted into Hindu names. Islamabad, which is where my family is from in Kashmir, it was converted to Anantnag.
Correct.
Takht Sulaiman was converted to Shankaracharya. So all these things have been happening. And like I said, present-day Hindutva fanatics in India can only dream of creating a nation what the Dogra Maharaja had already created in Kashmir. Muslims had no right of employment, no right in education. We were given education, but the opportunities were far, far less than what the Hindus were getting. 83% of the state budget was spent on educating Hindus, who were only 6% of the population. That's just one example that I can give you. Similarly, in case of employment, yeah.
Very interesting. Stay with me. I'm also joined by Dr. Salma Malik. She's an assistant professor at the Defense and Strategic Studies at the Qazi-Azam University. Dr. Malik, thank you for being on the program. We were talking about the significance of 13 July 1931 as the first intifada, the first sort of, wave of collective self-consciousness. What do you think is the significance of this date for Kashmiris on both sides of what I described in my opening as the artificial line?
It was a wonderful opportunity listening to the two other speakers prior to me. The images that you are showing on the screen, the locked markets, empty markets, barbed wires, Kashmir, which is heavily populated more by security forces than otherwise. This is an image which we still may find disturbing, but I think this is part of the everyday Kashmiri lifestyle, and they are so routinized by this that they no longer actually feel about it, and that is the biggest tragedy. Why it is the biggest tragedy? Because the children who are born in Kashmir for the last several decades, starting from the 1931 First Intifada, moving to date, for them, these things are part of their everyday lifestyle, their plays. I remember reading Basharat Peer and some other Kashmiri writers who would say that the toy images that the children have in their everyday play talks about jihad, and it talks about security forces, it talks about intifada, it talks about the tada, and so many other things which sound very scary to us, but that have become part and parcel of their daily life. Plus the very fact that Kashmiris are living under this shadow perpetually. And that's one wave of intifada followed by another wave of intifada. And the irony of this is that the Kashmiris feel that the more they're suppressed, the more they're going to stand up to the oppressors, stand up to what is happening against them, and their resolve is increasing by the day. And unfortunately, as the resolve increases by the day, so does the atrocities by the Indian state.
Absolutely. So much. That was Dr. Salma Malik speaking with us. Before I wrap up the segment, a quick question to Ambassador Kamal and to Mr. Beg. As I said, memories are short. And before 14th August 1947, for instance, and since I'm moderating this program, I cannot really speak myself about the Poonch uprising, and that's the area from which I belong. By the time the Maharaja had this standstill agreement, he had essentially lost the capability to govern the state of Jammu and Kashmir as it was envisaged in terms of the territorial borders. Ambassador Kamal.
Well, I think you have a valid point. Maharaja's capacity to continue ruling was very shrinking at the same time. And that is precisely the reason that he was not very sure if he should declare his intention to accede with India. And I think he was keeping space for something that would bring about a line between accession to India and accession to Pakistan, or staying and maintaining an equidistance between the two. I think that explains how the transformations have already taken place from the time of Ranbir Singh to Hari Singh. Yes.
Okay. Mirza Saaeb Beg, very quickly, because I have to wrap up the segment also.
add one thing over here. Of course, the Maharaja's ability to sign an accession on behalf of a people is questionable. I've spoken about that in the past also. But let us for a minute assume that it was valid. What does that mean? Does that mean that the people of Kashmir are bound in perpetuity? Do we never get the right to reconsider, to redecide? What does the meaning of the right of self-determination then? So,
Correct.
for example, in the UK, if Scotland wants to leave the United Kingdom, they have a referendum on that. They can choose to leave, as any people would. So this is a right of all people, and any democratic country, when you come to such a position where people decide that they are better off in a different future, you have to democratically deliberate upon it and come to a consensus. But otherwise, you will only go to war with the people. There is no imagination of a future which is not peaceful then. So whether the Maharaja's accession is legitimate or illegitimate, you have to refer to the people. Without the people's consent, there is no rule that can be legitimate. So,
Absolutely.
And again, I will reiterate that the Maharaja's accession in itself is very questionable, which I've spoken about, Fitzmaurice's legal opinion, how he has lost control of the territory, how he had lost legitimacy amongst the people, how there's a popular revolt against him, all of those things considered. But even if it is acceptable, it's still questionable today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was Mirza Saaeb. Thank you also to Ambassador Arif Kamal for speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss a decision by the Council of State in Turkey to reconvert Hagia Sophia into a mosque. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about Hagia Sophia, also known as Hagia Sophia and generally referred in Turkey as Hagia Sophia Jami, Jami being the word for mosque in the Turkish language. Anyone who has been to Istanbul, the incredibly historic and beautiful city in Turkey, possibly could not have missed visiting Hagia Sophia. Built in 537 AD during the reign of the Roman Emperor Justinian I, it was then the world's largest interior space and the first to employ a fully pendentive dome. Considered the epitome of the Byzantine architecture, it is said to have changed the history of architecture. The structure served as a Greek Orthodox cathedral and later a Roman Catholic cathedral until Mehmed the Conqueror turned it into a mosque in 1453. The complex remained a mosque until 1931 when it was closed to the public for 4 years. It was reopened in 1935 as a museum by the Republic of Turkey. As of 2014, Hagia Sophia was the second most visited museum in Turkey, attracting almost 3.3 million visitors annually. According to data released by Turkey's Ministry of Culture and Tourism, Hagia Sophia was Turkey's most visited tourist attraction in 2015 and 2019. Last Friday, Turkey's Council of State, the highest administrative body, annulled the 1934 decision by the cabinet and declared that Hagia Sophia will be reconverted to a mosque. Turkey's President Recep Erdogan endorsed the reclassification of the complex. The decision has come under criticism from various quarters, including in Turkey. To discuss this further, we have with us Yusuf, Erim, and Hammad Husain. Erim is Turkey's analyst for TRT World and a former assistant director of public relations at the Federation of Turkish American Associations in New York. Husain is president of League of Architects Pakistan. He is an educationist and a practicing architect with keen interest in Roman and Ottoman architecture. He got his architecture degree from Turkey. Let me begin with Hammad Husain here. Hammad, give me a sense of the significance of Hagia Sophia as an architectural monument and a little bit of its history.
Well, Hagia Sophia is a revolutionary building. It, as you rightly mentioned, it was built by Emperor Justinian in 537 AD. At that point, it was an unprecedented structure from an engineering and an architecture point of view because of two simple reasons I'll give you. One, it was a very high building. To be precise, the top of the dome is around 180 feet from the ground, which would roughly correspond to a 14-story building. And now we're talking about 6th century. And then it has a very open space, like the interior is totally standing on 4 thick pillars And on top of those 4 pillars is this huge dome, which is 108 feet in diameter. Why I am calling this an unprecedented and a magnificent building is because the engineering of those days was, till that time, was incapable of creating such a high and such a wide structure. And this was made possible by 2 people, one was a mathematician and the other was a physicist. And they were hired by the Byzantine emperor to construct this building. And they achieved this feat in a very short time of 6 years. Just to give you a comparison, the churches and the buildings in those days used to take almost 80, 90 or 100 years to build. So this structure was not only an engineering feat, it was completed in a very short time.
That is amazing. So give me a sense of, did the Muslim architects, for instance, Mimar Sinan, who's said to have created so many buildings in Istanbul, did he learn the construction of the dome from Hagia Sophia's structure?
Absolutely. When the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453 AD, that's the first time that not just the Ottomans, but any Muslim came across such a engineering marvel. And Sinan had a keen interest in not just architecture, but engineering also. And he studied this building because the Muslims had never seen such a big structure. Now, just to give you a little bit of a technical, the details of it, when a building is very high, there's that much chance of the walls falling off. And then when you put a dome on it, now a dome has a lateral thrust, which means that the vertical wall will be pressured into falling sideways. So the higher you go, the more the thrust. And that is why if you look at Hagia Sophia, it has got half domes and it has got buttresses which support that wall from falling outwards. This was basically why it is considered an engineering marvel, because in order to get a zero sum of forces, we're talking about hundreds of tons of weight, which is bearing down on the walls and bearing sidewards on the walls. So this is what Sinan learnt from Hagia Sophia, and then he started implementing this in his mosques. He started with small mosques, and then slowly and steadily he went on and he built his famous Suleymaniye Mosque, which was built for Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, and later on the masterpiece in Edirne, which is called the Selimiye Mosque, which was built for Suleiman's son Selim II. So Ottoman mosques since that day have followed the pattern of Hagia Sophia, the structural system of Hagia Sophia. And I would like to add here that if you look at mosques in other countries of the world, the subcontinent in our area, if you go to Africa or Southeast Asia, the stark contrast that we see is that these buildings are small. Look at Badshahi Masjid in Lahore. It's not very high, and it's got a lot of columns in it. So what Sinan achieved in Turkey was a huge open space and a very high space, which was structurally very difficult. And none of the other Muslim countries could achieve that because they did not have a Hagia Sophia to learn from.
Okay, that's fascinating. Thank you so much. That was Hammad Husain speaking with us. Let me go to Yusuf Erim now. Yusuf, you have the good fortune of actually living in that beautiful city. Give me a sense of the politics of this now. It's obviously really amazing that, it's more than 1,500 years and this building is still there. But what's the politics now? Give me a sense of that.
First thing, the Hagia Sophia is definitely a marvelous building. I've had the pleasure of visiting it 10, 15 times in my life. And every time I go in, I still marvel at it. It's not only beautiful architecturally, as the previous guests explained, just the artwork inside, also the signatures of the sultans, but also coupled with the beautiful Christian iconography and mosaic. It was revolutionary in 1453. It's still revolutionary now. It's still, it was revolutionary in the 6th century when it was built. I mean, this building transcends time. It's a truly majestic and grandiose building. Now, the politics behind the Hagia Sophia, when we're looking at domestic reactions, we're seeing widespread support for the reversion of Hagia Sophia back into a mosque. And when we're talking about this decision, I think we could split it up into 3 different factors. One being legal, which there's very solid legal precedent and solid legal ground for this reversion. We have to remember that the Council of State did not decide to turn Hagia Sophia into a mosque. The Council of State annulled a 1934 decision turning it into a museum, and as such, it was automatically reverted back to its previous state. So I think a lot of people get that wording wrong, and I think it's very important to state that. Now, was this a political decision? Well, I think this was just as political a decision as the decision in 1934 was to turn it into a museum. So I think they were equally political decisions. But when we see the support behind it right now, whether it be the ruling AK Party heavily supporting it, the coalition partner nationalist MHP Party, the opposition coalition nationalist party, the E Party, also supporting it as well. And the major opposition, secular CHP, saying, you know what, we're not going to stand in the way of a decision. But we are seeing very key members of the major opposition, CHP, tweeting support for this decision as well. So politically, it's enjoying support across the spectrum. Domestically, amongst the people, it's enjoying support as well, where I could say an overwhelming majority of people either support this decision or are impartial to this decision and don't care either way. So nobody's standing in the way of it. Many people supporting it. So it has given Erdogan a free path to support this decision and to reverting it back into a mosque. Now, internationally, that's a different story. Many people are talking about an international reaction. Well, yes, the West, there has been some international reactions from the West, whether it be the top levels of the Russian government, political and religious leaders in Greece, the U.S. Secretary of State, the Pope himself has expressed disappointment. UNESCO has sternly warned Turkey about Hagia Sophia's status as a World Heritage Site. But we have seen very strong assurances from the Turkish president saying, listen, this will not impact the religious identity of Hagia Sophia as a place of worship, and also the cultural identity of Hagia Sophia as being a very important to the region. So the Turkish president, from what I've been told, and my sources tell me that they're going to use a light mapping technology inside, so they won't be forced to cover these very important Christian icons inside. Rather, they will have a thinly veiled project light mapping technology, and these beautiful Christian icons will still be displayed while ensuring proper conditions for Islamic worship. So it looks like the Turkish government taking very ingenious steps to create a situation where tourists can be happy, Christians can continue to visit and view these very important icons, but Muslims can worship as well.
Well, right across from Hagia Sophia is this another beautiful mosque, the Blue Mosque. So, and you know, Muslims were praying there. I've prayed there a couple of times when I was in Istanbul. Now, President Erdogan has basically said that Turkey has exercised its sovereign right in converting it to a mosque. I mean, it is Turkey's sovereign right. I mean, the structure is in Turkey. And it's been there, it's been as you yourself said, it transcends time and space, it transcends the religious lines. What exactly was the reason to convert it into a mosque? Or reconvert it into a mosque?
Many people back in 1934, actually, it was not a popular decision by the Turkish government back in 1934 to turn it into a museum in the first place. And ever since then, there has been time to time that it has been brought to the agenda to bring it back to a mosque, but previous governments have never taken those steps. Now, when Mehmed the Conqueror entered Istanbul in 1453, Hagia Sophia became part of his personal property, and afterwards it was given to a foundation in his name. And it was strictly stipulated that Hagia Sophia would be used as a mosque. So the decision was illegal to turn it into a museum in the first place. And many people also question the signatures in the 1934 ministerial cabinet's decree turning this structure into a museum as well. So there was a non-governmental organization that had fought to bring this back revert it back to a mosque. And when we look at Turkish law, it had to exhaust all channels, all judicial channels before applying to the Council of State. And after several rejections, it finally opened the door to the Council of State, was able to apply, and after some time, this was brought to the agenda. So this was not a timing issue. This was not really political when we look at the process that came here. This has been a very long process. This is not something where someone in Ankara just pressed on a button and said, hey, let's bring Hagia Sophia back into the topic, back into the agenda, and let's turn it. It didn't work like that.
But
this was a judicial process.
I understand. There's also the issue of modern sensibility. Now, we know that it was originally considered as, it was raised as a Greek Orthodox cathedral. And then the Crusaders turned it into a Roman Catholic cathedral. So, but that was then. Now the modern sensibility requires us to deal with these issues in a different kind of way, because otherwise in the subcontinent, for instance, this is one of the things that the Hindutva people say about the Babri Mosque. They destroyed it and they want to raise a mandir in its place. So if we were to disregard the modern sensibility of how to deal with these things, then we get into a problem.
Well, I think Hagia Sophia has a very special place in Turkish and Ottoman history, also a very special place in Islam. Now, we have to realize the hadiths by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he heralded the conquest of Constantinople, and he said that the army and the general that would claim Constantinople for the Muslim world would be, he would have partaken a very holy deed. Now, when we go back 1,000 years, any Muslim looking at Constantinople would obviously be in awe of the Hagia Sophia. And many feel that this structure was very important, that the Muslim world wanted to add it to this, among its mosques. Mehmed the Conqueror was also a very pious man, obviously well aware of these hadiths, and took it upon himself to be that man that claimed not only Constantinople, but such an important structure in the name of Islam. When we're taking all this into account, so why not make it an active place? What happens? Why must people be offended that there's active Muslim worship being taken place in this structure? Nothing is happening to the Christian iconography. Muslims, non-Muslims, Turks, foreigners, everybody can visit. Why do people have such a problem with Muslims praying in this place as they have for over 500 years?
Okay. Thank you so much. That was Yusuf, Erim speaking with us. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.